Hello Internet, it's been a while, but you know what? Hang on a second, we're missing something. There we go, much better. Now we are appropriately tied for the season. You know what time it is. It is State of the Workshop 2024. Another year gone. I did very poorly at making videos in 2023. That wasn't that I wasn't doing anything, but I did a lot of stuff that I just didn't need the distraction of filming. I did put a lot of stuff out on Instagram, which is a lot easier for doing little lightweight things, but YouTube takes a little bit more time, and I didn't really have it in most of the year. But there you go. I have done my seasonal review of the previous years, which is difficult to put in a top third if the camera is going to follow me. So step one, last year, I had the robot cameraman was kind of not exactly fully in commission. A lot of stuff wasn't working. I was about to fix it. I did fix it. We have back to full tracking and proper camera control, all the rest of it from the mobile. So that's one improvement. Last year, I believe I said life was kind of chaos in the workshop, and it's always a little bit chaos, but we're doing a little bit better this year than last year. I've spent some time in the last week or two tidying, trying to get things back under control after a bunch of projects. Christmas make things and other stuff. I made a set of drawers. We'll take a look at those later. So there was, sawdust and stuff over every single surface, but we're a little bit tidier by my standards. As I've said to my wife, when I say tidy, I mean the action, not the state. I can always try to do more tidying. It never really achieves the state of tidy, but there you go. So what have we been up to in 2023? My goodness. I will walk around the workshop again this time. I didn't last year because really nothing had changed. And honestly, not a great deal has changed again in terms of the structure of the workshop. But I think it's nice to have a bit of a snapshot. So I guess let's start over here. So the first thing I will highlight is this big grey panel up here. If I lean further over, anyone that watched last year's and happens to remember it may recognize this panel was on a cupboard outside. It was a ridiculously overcomplicated CNC door that I made for an outdoor cupboard. I had this idea that it would look good. I had another whole door to do. Unfortunately, even painted, the basically the pallet wood I made it out of bowed massively. It's difficult to see on camera, but there's just a huge bow in this panel, so much so that pieces of it popped out. So that proved that was a really bad idea. So I will inset here what the current cupboard looks like. So yeah, last year that fancy panel was on one side of this cupboard. I had another door to do. And then it bowed and failed horribly. So now it's a much more simple, still pallet wood construction, steel frames backed by plywood, and it still bows somewhat, but much less noticeably. And it was way faster to make each of these doors. If I walk a bit further away, way faster to make those than it was to do the CNC thing. So that ended up being more sensible. And at the moment, the hardtop is out again because it's winter. But this was great over the summer to put that away and just have a place to keep it that didn't clot up the workshop, so that was fantastic. Basically, I just ended up stripping pallet wood in a much more simple mechanism. Even those bow quite significantly, like they're backed on plywood, glued and nailed. It's got a metal frame behind it, but like when it's wet, those doors really do warp. I have to fight them to be closed. I might try finishing them more this year to see if keeping the moisture out helps, but it is what it is. So that was kind of a 2022 project that led very much into 2023. And that took a bunch of time and wasn't very exciting to film. Then we got to the path, which we'll put here. And so the other thing that took up a lot of time was my garden path. This used to just be a green hillock. And we had to walk down the driveway to get in and out of the house. So I cut a big swathe through the garden and laid a path. And now this is something that I enjoy every day, just being able to walk the desire path, as it were, out of the house. So that took a bunch of time over Easter. I didn't really film most of it, but it was a project that I did, and I'm pretty happy with it. So yeah, that was quite a lot of work. Again, I wasn't really in the mood to film a lot of that. It was just a lot of back-breaking, digging, and laying and whatever. Very useful to the house. Very glad I did it. Love the path. Not great YouTube content, or at least I didn't want to do it. Last year, I had also recently finished rebuilding the CNC machine. This year, I used it quite a bit. I spent quite a lot of time truing up the frame. I had a bunch of problems with things being slightly off square, which I had to deal with. Some of that was just me being stupid in little ways that were frustrating. Like I thought I was being clever homing both sides of the wire gantry. Just in case it kind of did get racked during operation, it would always reset to a non-racked state. And it took me a very long time to notice that the little pins I'd printed to activate the sensors were different lengths on each side, which is a really embarrassing kind of failure. So I, in fact, intentionally caused it to rack every single time I homed it, which did not help matters. But I did eventually figure that out, amongst other little issues that needed resolving. That's been working great. And I say I spent quite a lot of time making the custom drawers, which I'll do pictures up here or something. So that was a really fun project because it spanned a lot of digital into analog, as it were. I basically used Blender to do a cloth simulation to create the sort of flowing fabric-y look I wanted on the front, converted that into a mesh into Fusion 360 that I could then create the 3D carve paths for. And then because of the resolution I did that at, it came out slightly faceted, which you can kind of see in those pictures. And I did think about just sanding that all smooth. I could have just sanded that out pretty easily, or I could have increased the resolution of the thing in the first place, but I quite like that it is both sort of an organic shape, but betrays its digital heritage, if you will. So lots of CNC time. Again, CNCing just a lot of project doesn't really make for a hugely amazing YouTube video. It's also very expensive to make custom drawers. I really wish it wasn't, but it honestly cost like twice as much just to buy the raw materials to make that as it would have cost to buy like a cheap set of drawers from Amazon. But there you go. That's why we do these things, to make them custom. Right, moving this way. This corner, very, very similar to previous years. The laser is here. I use the laser quite a bit for a bunch of different projects. I did a bunch of prototyping for a project, which I'll come back to later. The main subtle difference is that I ended up jacking the laser up a little bit on these little 3D printed jack blocks right here, just because I wanted to be able to put a rotary axis in the machine on top of my scissor lift bed, and to get the right heights I just needed to come like a little bit higher than it had. So I have these 3D printed jacks that I just stuck in each corner. That worked great. This whole side is still basically acrylic storage. Obviously I've got my paints and air tools along here, and this is my water-cooled grinder. It's all a bit messy over here. I don't use the Waterstone a great deal, and I just come and access the things when I need them. But you know, I guess it's sort of somewhat functional as a piece of workshop. The storage works well. I'm a very untidy person, but having specific places for things to go back to does help me, because these things do tend to make their way back to their home. So I should probably do more creating specific homes for the things that don't end up in the right places. Right. Oh yes, I guess I should also say resin printer and curing station on here. Haven't used them a huge amount in the year. Occasionally they're very useful for prototyping parts. I find resin to be quite brittle for workshop use or a lot of stuff I do, but it is very useful for doing really fine detail stuff. So at one point I was playing with a rotary encoder with an optical sensor and making something that printed the really fine gratings was really useful. I also prototyped a gear shifter for my MX-5, which I ended up casting, and it was nice to use that to get like the high resolution master for that. But other than that, haven't used it a great deal. Used my other 3D printer a ton. Moving on round, wood lathe, still largely unloved. I did turn something on this year. I made a slightly nicer base for like an archery trophy out of a chunk of yew that I had laying around, but I hadn't really used this in a long time. I didn't do a hugely amazing job of that turning. It was good enough, but mostly that just reminded me how out of practice I am at the wood lathe. But you know, occasionally it's useful to have it there. Metal chomper. Come down here. Metal chomper, occasionally very useful, but again, it's one of these tools that's a real luxury to have, because it's just every so often be able to cut like fairly precise strips of thin steel is super helpful, but it's not like an every week tool or anything, but very cool. Behind me, this station setup that I have back here is still chop saw, belt sander, spindle sander on a mobile station that has the shop vac underneath it. This is working kind of well, I guess. I certainly use the belt sander a fair amount, and obviously the shop vac a lot. I find it a bit inconvenient at the shop vac. I end up sort of tucking it in this corner, and it is on wheels, and in theory I can move it out, but in practice I end up doing a lot of like leaning over into this awkward space to use it, and like leaning in to switch off and on the shop vac, which is not super ideal. I did briefly have the shop vac on a like a Zigbee controlled socket setup, but I found that socket to be a little bit unreliable, which is kind of even worse than having to go and do it manually. But I might go revisit some kind of automation there so that I can leave the bulky machine out of the way, but be able to control it a bit more easily. But you know, I would give this sort of a 7-ish stars out of 10 at the moment. It is still doing its job. I might think about taking the chop saw off it to make the standing stuff a bit more accessible, because I use the chop saw less often. Something to think about. And obviously here we have the Evolution table saw, and beneath it there is a planer thicknesser on a stand, also on wheels. This has actually been really good to have on wheels, because again, I don't use the table saw very often, but when I do, I'm tending to use larger material. I'm going to pull it out to cut that material and push it back again. Really good. The only other problem is, as it's a flat surface around me, it often spends most of its life covered in stuff that's nothing to do with being a table saw, which is, I guess, useful, but also not ideal when I do need to want to use it as a table saw. But, you know, it is what it is. Did I use this tool a great deal? I guess I used this a lot for stripping down the material for my drawers, just like the plywood into the pieces big enough to put on the CNC machine and such. So I saw some decent usage this year. It's one of those tools that is super helpful to have, but takes up quite a bit of space. But I think it's earned its keep. Let's. Right, let me just. Moving on around, bandsaw. This is probably pretty much next to the lathe the oldest two tools in the workshop. Still a workhorse. I tend to leave it with the big 1-inch blade on it because I do a lot of just bulk cutting stuff up. Tend not to use it for more curvy precision stuff. I do not have it very well tuned. It does not cut straight lines particularly well, certainly not against the fence. I tend to do a lot of it freehand following the lines, but it is super useful for breaking up a lot of stuff. And aside from the fact that it's very heavy and difficult to move, it's definitely definitely holding its shape. And again, like part of setting up the table saw, let me see if I can bring you down here. Part of setting up the table saw and its base was to keep it level with the bandsaw base so that it is an in-feed, out-feed table for itself. And the same is true of this workstation over here. This worktop is the same level again. So in theory, along this whole set, I have some consistent usage. That said, let me... Let me just give you a bit of zoom. Gonna fight the tracking now. This chop saw is the bigger chop saw. Let's do that. This is the bigger chop saw, and it's pretty good, but I have got the alignment of this and the blade wrong. I really need the bandsaw to be back 2 or 3 inches, or this to be forwards 2 or 3 inches, because for long stuff I end up clashing against the blade of the bandsaw. And this area is still a mess, as much as I have tidied the rest of the workshop. This whole zone, I come down here. Come on, come on. I guess that's as far as you're going to come. This whole kind of wood storage bit, the front of it ends up a complete mess because I end up just leaning wood against it. Behind, in theory, is sheet storage, and at the back, long metal storage. That works sort of well. I tend to forget that I have material back there. It is convenient to keep it out of the way, but like I probably need a better catalog of what's there. The other thing is that now that we have 2 cars consistently in the driveway, the only way to get the long storage out is to open this big garage door, which requires me to move a car, and if it's raining, that's a bit of a hassle. But again, on balance, the sort of practical storage of stuff that's out of the way against the amount of times I need to get it is not too bad. But there's probably a reason that I also have a bunch of lengths of steel on the floor here, because where I've pulled them out, I'm like, oh, I don't want to put them back. So that's a bit messy at the moment. Come on, back up. Come on, all the way. Thank you. And pillar drill in the corner. Still basically rocking along, doing its job. Sometimes I do wonder whether I would be better off with just a benchtop drill. I don't use it as much, particularly now I have the mill. Like a lot of drilling operations that I do tend to be more precise. So it takes up a fair amount of space for its utility. I've had it a long time. It's not necessarily a particularly good one, but it definitely gets the job done. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like if I didn't have it, these days I would probably go for a smaller thing, because I think the number of times I've needed like full pillar drill depth, like maybe once in 15 years. But I have it, so it is what it is. And this set of shelves and whatnot are fine. They're a bit out of the way. What I tend to find is that, as I mentioned, this whole area behind me ends up stacked with bits of wood and offcuts and whatnot, and it makes it difficult to get to these shelves. So I tend not to use the stuff on them very much. It's useful to have the storage, but it would perhaps, wow, I've got to be better at getting rid of material, but I'm such a hoarder. Like I had a bunch of stuff come on pallets for the garden path, which were pretty decent wood, solid, and so I'm loath to just throw that away. So I keep it, but then if I don't have a project for it, etc., etc., etc. Right, I think I'm going to need to move the base of the camera to get you a better view of the next 2 bits. All right, so the mill. In fact, mill is somewhat clean this time, which is nice. So the mill is looking nice and tidy at this time. I did do this clean a couple of weeks ago, or not even that, a week ago. So this is actually looking quite respectable at this point. What makes the cleaning a lot easier, something I did this year, is I printed a bunch of these little U-shaped channel things that clip into the slots and just keep the chips from going in there. It means it's a little bit easier to clean up the table. At the moment I have my main vise mounted in the middle and a rotary table mounted on this end. It's probably going to be easier for me to film the rotary on this camera. So yeah, so we've got the, I'll probably need to do it this way. So yeah, we have the vise in the center and a rotary table on this end. One of the jobs I did this year was to make, I don't know if I can see them in here at all. One of the jobs I did this year was to make these little lugs, the keys that bolt to the bottom of this, just to center them in this slot, which just makes setting this up a little bit faster than it would otherwise be, because you can just get that position quite nicely. And you know, you'd obviously need to adjust it a little bit, but that's a fairly precise fit centered on that rail, and makes bolting that down nicer. This year I think I do want to make some kind of fixturing for the top of this so that it can take a chuck at least, possibly an ER32 collet, we'll see. I haven't used this as much as I would like. I definitely want to kind of get into more projects where this would be useful, but it's a very nice piece of kit to have to go with the vise. That's the mill. It's looking pretty nice right now. I think if I wasn't doing this video, I would be tramming the mill for the new year. That's definitely a new year job, is to retram the head, get everything clocked in nicely so that that's ready ahead of any other project. That brings us to the lathe. Oh, in fact, I say that brings us to the lathe. The other thing, that the power supply in this DRO failed on me, which was super annoying in the middle of a project, but I discovered that the power supply in it is just a little separate board that then just delivers 5 volts to the main logic and display. So I just ripped out that power supply and put in a USB-C socket and just ran the power straight to the board. That works great. I actually think it works so well, I might do the same doctoring to the DRO for the lathe, because then I just have a little USB hub back here that will power them both, and that saves me a whole socket. And there's all sorts of reasons that having USB near here is quite useful, not least of which the lead screw controller. One of the few videos I did make in 2023 was about the electronic lead screw project on the lathe. What I haven't done is update that video with the enhancements I made since the end of it, which have made it super cool. I think at the end of the last video, it was a little bit twitchy, a little bit delicate to use. I had some successes with it, but reliability was an issue. I have since eliminated those problems as far as I can tell. I've made a bunch of threads from M3 to M8. It's great. So let's just take a better look at that. So, lead screw controller box mounted on the lathe here. This obviously takes USB 5 volts. It's a little Arduino Nano. And into it we take a signal from an optical encoder that is mounted in the gearbox here, that is just reading the spindle RPM. It takes some inputs from, I have end stop switches that I can position on the bed here, up and down. So I can position these where I want, and then when the carriage hits them, it just toggles a change of direction on the controller. So this is super useful. At the end of the last project, at the end of the last video, I didn't have the switches mounted, which was kind of just a little extra, but I was using a very different motor and driver setup, and it was just a normal stepper motor. But actually most people that do these projects end up, I think, in this place, which is, this is a servo type stepper. So it has a built-in driver, which is nice. You just give it signal straight to it. But the important thing is it internally knows where it's supposed to be, so it doesn't really drop steps in the same way, or at least if it stalls, it tries to catch up. And so that makes a big difference in this application, that it seems to do a much better job of holding where it needs to be and not kind of creating any kind of drift. So that was a huge improvement. This was itself about 100 quid. But between this and like the Arduino's pretty cheap, I think they're like 7 quid a pop. So this whole controller board was, I mean, I created a custom PCB for this setup, which wasn't too expensive really. So I do in fact have some more of these that I have on my website for sale if people are super interested in doing this kind of conversion for themselves. You know, the rotary encoder is a pretty standard part that you can get from Amazon. This is a very standard part you can get from, I think it's Steppers Online. And so pretty much once you've got this and this, then adding the magic in the middle gives you an awesome ability on the lathe. And actually just the other day, just yesterday, I improved this PSU. I used to not have this switch and socket on it, which was annoying because I had to leave it, I had to sort of unplug it and plug it in every time I wanted to use anything. I now have a proper switch on it, so I can power that on and power this on, and you can see possibly that this is rotating down here. So at the moment we're on the absolute finest speed, so if I engage this it moves very, very slowly, which is awesome for doing very fine finishing. But I can obviously increase this if I move this position so that it will bounce. You can increase the speed by upping this as much as you like, and on this display it tells me which of these feed rates map to which metric thread types, so I can kind of make sure that I'm doing the right thing. Let me put this one here so that it will bounce the other way. And obviously this setup is super helpful for being able to just do finishing passes, because you can kind of get the zone that you're covering and just have it auto crank all the way in, crank out the other way out. You make your fine adjustment on the cross slide and back and forth it goes. This makes this really helpful, and obviously it goes quite fast. I haven't actually bolted these end stops in place, so they're getting pushed a bit, but you can go up pretty quick. Let me just turn the overall thing down. I think there we go. I think up to a 1.5 mil, 1.75, that's what up to, but and then back down to central. And obviously you can also change the direction on the controller itself, so I can kind of manually make that adjustment. I do have the scope to add a lot more sort of feed rates. I have one imperial feed rate in here, just because I was experimenting and I had no way to check it, so I haven't really done more. But this whole setup has been amazing. So switch that off. That has been incredible to use. Come back up here. I say I really should make a proper video about this whole thing, but that has just made a huge difference to my lathe work. I made a bunch of like pens towards the end of the year. I say doing like fine M3s or M8s and just being able to flip between them and like easily switch to doing roughing passes and finishing passes. So good, so good. I highly recommend, if you have a lathe, an electronic screw project for it is amazing. Don't necessarily have to buy mine or even do it the way I did it. Cloud42 is obviously probably the most famous person who most people have heard of, who has a whole kit. He did it a slightly different way. Mine, I think, is a little bit cheaper than his, but you know, you get what you get. Yes, but absolutely a super good addition to a little lathe. Right, I think that's all of this side of the workshop. Let's go look at the metalworking side. Right, that's a little bit better. So, metal cutting bandsaw, currently hung on its hook, still going strong, still using the spare tire that I cast for it in rubber like 2 years ago. That's a great little workhorse, use it all the time. General clutter of spare metal and bits over here, and obviously the welding table, vise, configuration over here. I haven't done a huge amount of welding in the last year. I guess I made the frames for the door. I want to make the gate. Oh, I made a pull-up bar. I made a pull-up bar that was also doubled as a fence brace because we had a fence that was wafting in the wind somewhat alarmingly. And I also wanted somewhere to do pull-ups. So the combination of those was rather wonderful. So yes, MIG welder, TIG welder, and now, new edition, plasma cutter. It's going to take you into roving reporter mode. Hello, cameraman. Plasma cutter. This was a birthday present from my wife. It's amazing. This was sold as I think it's the Susume 50 something or another. This is clearly a brand that just gets rebadged, etc. as required. So there's a bunch that look very similar to it. Some of them have blue cases, some of them have a yellow case. But it is a wee diddy thing. Takes air from the shop compressor and it's amazing. I did the last video on my channel is me demonstrating that usage to cut big chunks out of this old aluminium structure because I wanted to be able to reclaim the flat bits that were free of pegs for potential future projects. It's amazing. So that is sitting there at the moment. I don't know whether that's the final home for it. I think ultimately what I want to do is make a proper cart for the TIG welder to stack the MIG welder on it and then put the plasma cutter on that so that there are a wee stack of useful things. So that is an amazing tool and I have lots of things that I want to play with in that regard. And I think the combination now of plasma cutter and TIG welder is like blows my mind. So that's really cool. Other than that, what else? Anything else going on here? Not really. It's still a mess over here. This is very untidy. I need to clean it up again. It gets messy very quickly, particularly with the plasma cutter just shooting like shards of whatever it's cutting through all over the place. So yeah, this part of the workshop and the wood part of the workshop still needs a significant tidy. But other than that, we're basically done. That's it. That's where we are in the end of 2023. Let's go and think about if there were any other projects that are worth mentioning. So there are a bunch of other things that I spent time working on and making during the year. Gifts, pens, all sorts of stuff like that. DIY stuff. But the main thing I spent a bunch of time over the summer working on was this. This is my attempt at an everyday item kind of design. This is a coffee carrier. I've had a coffee carrier variant of this design for quite a lot of time. Basically, my local coffee shop, main chain, used to provide quite convenient little cardboard carriers that gave you a handle to carry. And then at some point, I want to say like 5 or 6 years ago, they decided that everyone needs to carry them in those like corrugated things that you stick the cups into, and they're like really unbalanced and awkward, and you kind of have to carry them with 2 hands, and I found it very annoying. So I made a version of a coffee carrier many years ago, and this was my attempt to refine that concept into its final form, if you will. So get a little bit closer here. So a couple of things about it. Obviously it folds flat. I like it because it fits conveniently in my back pocket. The handle is designed to kind of hold just a little bit upright, so it's quite easy to move, but it kind of doesn't fall over because I often want to put this on the counter at the coffee shop and I want them to be able to put the cups straight in without this being in the way. This one I've used quite a bit, so it's a little bit looser than most, but that works quite well. The other thing I wanted, because a lot of people, when they had seen I had a coffee carrier, they like this idea. Obviously there are many coffee carriers in the world, but often what you find is you will want a 4-cup carrier, and I mostly only wanted a 2-cup carrier, and I didn't want to make 2 designs, but I did recognize that sometimes you want to carry 4 cups. So the key part of this design is that these 2 areas come out and they lock into the pins that hold them in place that side, and now you have a 4-cup carrier, and there's just enough force there that it will carry 4 large coffees from my local coffee store. And when you're done, you can just rotate them back and they clip back in the other way, and you're back to a 2-cup carrier. I call this the Wingman. This is not going to focus very well, is it? I call this the Wingman coffee carrier. This was an interesting exercise in design and refining the design. I went through a bunch of different things. I used the laser cutter for a bunch of stuff. I 3D printed a bunch of stuff. This is laser cut acrylic with a 3D printed handle. All the parts of exactly how to manufacture this have been tweaked and refined until I was happy with it. This is actually one of the earlier prototypes. I changed a couple of things about the mounting points because I wanted to be able to construct it relatively simply, but obviously have it be secure and portable. So I'm very happy with this design. So happy with this design that I sell these through my website, makergeek.co.uk. So if you happen to be interested in a coffee carrier that is a 2-cup or a 4-cup carrier in one, then you can check that out there. I probably ought to do something like actually market the thing or advertise it. At the moment, all I've done really is create the website that allows me to sell them and have the ability to make them. And I don't really know where to go with it from here, but we'll see. It'll probably just plod along as a thing that exists that many people won't care about and some people might be interested in. So there you go. That's that. Because the other thing from last year's State of the Workshop that wasn't really workshop related, but I ended up commenting on, was that I had lost a lot of weight through 2022 and compared myself at the end of, well, I guess the beginning of 2023 to what I was like at the beginning of the previous year. So a year on, where am I? I'm about, I guess I was about 76-ish kilos in that last video. I'm about 82 kilos now. So definitely heading into a January where I try and undo some of the damage of Christmas again. Still running a lot. I ran 2,600 kilometers about in 2023. I don't intend to necessarily try and keep up that amount of distance all the time, but I'm just in the habit of running almost every day, which is nice. So yeah, I guess the state of the Dan is reasonably healthy as well. So that's pretty good. Anything else for the year? I didn't really round up all of the gifts that I got this year. I should probably, obviously the plasma cutter looms large is an amazing tool, but I got, as often is the case, a range of very cool and useful things from my family for Christmas and my birthday. Stuff like sandpaper, which they always think I'm crazy for wanting, but I find super useful to have lots of in stock. I got a new surfacing bit for the CNC machine. I got a new surfacing bit for the milling machine. I got, basically things to take carbide cutter inserts. I got some new thread cutting taps, sort of speed taps, because whilst the threading on the mill external is fantastic, there's a limit to how small you can go for single point threading an internal thread, and obviously up to about M5 certainly it's super easy. M8 is reasonably easy. Once you get beyond M8, you start to get into territory where it might be easier to do it with a single point thread, but there you go. So yes, very fortunate as always to have gotten a lot of cool things for the workshop to play with in 2024. So there you go. Whether I will be better about making videos in 2024 remains to be seen. I will try. I say I tend to put out a lot more on Instagram because it's a lot lighter weight as a process to just put little clips of things and such, but I will try to think more about doing more YouTube videos. It is useful and it's been interesting today to use the remote cameraman again. I haven't used it for a while and it's been working great, and just having all of the controls does make this a faster process. So there you go. Anyway, I've talked long enough. I need to edit this video. Thank you for watching. Hope you have a great 2024. Please share the projects and stuff you work on. I'm always interested in more inspiration from other people. See you next time.